Hello and welcome to What's on My Mind with Fiona. I'm your host, Fiona Kane, and there's a few things on my mind this week. So, first, I'll start with continuing on from last week. I was talking about the women's boxing at the Paris Olympics, and the huge amount of gaslighting and ridiculous stuff that's happened this week has been unbelievable. Well, not unbelievable because I've come to expect it by now, but ridiculous, right? So, again, on the evidence that we have at this point in time, the two boxes in question, uh, it looks like they have differences in gender, which is otherwise known as intersex. Now, I don't know that for sure. It's the only information we have at the moment because essentially they failed tests. They failed tests to see if they were women, and they weren't testosterone tests. They said they were something else, and the only other something else they could have been would have been looking at genetics. So clearly they came up as XY and not XX. Now, I can't say that definitively, but based on the information that has been given and that isn't being given, that's the only assumption I can make at this point. I'm happy to be corrected if in future we have new information, but that's all the information we have right now. So these two athletes, what happens with this particular? I've sort of been reading and listening to lots of things about this particular type of differences in sex, and what they say is that these well, these men, they're boys, they're males, but when they're first born, because the hormones haven't kicked in pre-birth in the way that they should do, in the way that they normally would, what happens is the testes actually stay undescended, and their genital area looks it's ambiguous. It's a bit confusing as to what sex these babies are. And in the Western world, in a lot of Western places now, that would be recognised that, okay, there's something not quite right there. They would actually do a swab or a blood test or whatever just to confirm whether that baby is actually genetically a boy or a girl and go from there. But these boxers, I think one was from Algeria and the other one, correct me if I'm wrong, but it might have been Taiwan. Although I think Taiwan, do you think they'd be a bit more advanced? I don't know. Not sure. I could be wrong about the second one. But essentially, maybe in some places when they do have this ambiguous thing, they don't do further testing and checking, and maybe there's certain parts of the world where they don't do that. So anyway, what would happen if they don't do that testing and sort of checking is it's not unbelievable to believe that these athletes would have grown up as girls and would have thought that they were girls. And then what happens is when they actually hit puberty and their hormones really kick in there and the testosterone kicks in, that is when it becomes quite clear that they become very masculine and that these are actually boys, not girls. And so it's at that point then that sometimes people don't find out until that age. So some people are finding out a lot earlier now because there's a lot more awareness around it and people are checking it. But some people do not find out until they're in their teens. They start going through puberty, and I don't know if they're just not paying attention. They don't want to. Maybe it's the cultures where it's not okay to accept that you could be the other sex. I don't know. But essentially, these athletes most likely are biological males who have grown up believing they were girls until a certain age. Now, the arguments I'm seeing online are things like, there's women who are, kind of there's butch women and muscly women and all that. Yes, there is. So in general, in sport, that is where women can be quite non-conforming to whatever is expected of their gender. Athletic women look all different ways, and some athletic women do look more male-like. And some don't, right? And there's quite a range in there, and that's fine. If they're XX, if they are women and they're not doping or whatever, that's fine. There's always going to be a range. It's very, very different though if the person is XY. Now, what makes me suspicious that they are definitely XY, these boxes, is because they could sort this out really quickly by either getting the other people to release the federation, whoever it was that did the testing, to release the test results, or getting apparently like a cheek DNA swab could be done, and you'd have the answer within about 3 hours or something. So it'd be very, very simple testing, just to sort of, they could just say, look, all right, let's just, rather than all of this speculation, let's just get this test and just rule us in or rule us out. Now, my intention is not like, I know some people have been very nasty and bullying towards these people. I don't think that is fair. I don't think that the intention is not to be really cruel and mean to those people, and people with those disorders. I can only imagine it would be very challenging, and I really feel for people going through that sort of thing. However, once you find out that you are XY, then you have to acknowledge that you shouldn't be competing against women. It is as simple as that. However difficult it is for the people involved, and I acknowledge that it can be really tough for some of these people, that is not the problem of all women, and women shouldn't have to pay for that. Now, and the other thing people are saying is, oh, if it's just about testosterone, this isn't just about testosterone. This is a very different thing. If you are XY, it is not just about testosterone. It's about what testosterone does to your body, and it's about shapes and sizes and things like that. And essentially, if someone has had male puberty, which it's very likely these two people have, even if later on then they took hormones, that they took, blockers, or they took estrogen or things like that, it does not completely reverse or change everything about them that had that male advantage. So it is not as simple as saying if people do or don't have X amount of testosterone, it's fine. It's not as simple as that. So some of the examples here, I've kind of got them written down in a couple of places just so I can kind of check what these are. So in regards to sort of men versus women from a strength point of view, and just from a like physiological point of view, the difference. So that men have stronger hand strength, they have stronger wrists, they have tighter tendons, so they store more power. And it's also the shape of the hips. So the sort of pelvic region is that women start to kind of get a little bit more. That sort of opens up a bit more and end up with a bit more of a Y sort of shape once we go through puberty, whereas men don't. And it puts us a lot more risk of knee injuries and things like that, because we're not quite the position we need to be. Because our bodies prepare for the fact that a baby might be coming through there. So there's that shape difference. So that also men have more fast twitch fibers in their muscles, bigger muscles. They also have better bone density. And like I said before, the hips, the pelvis, they work differently, putting force through different areas based on the shape there. They also have a stronger skull and a stronger jaw, which would be very important in something like boxing, right? And they have deeper set eyes, which also would probably be useful in something like boxing, that you sort of eyes a bit more protected. They have a hugely different punching power. I've heard different numbers, but it's something like 60% more, or it could be even more than that, but it's a lot bigger punching power than women. So the other details I had here, let me just check these. I'm just trying to get you to understand why it's important that we need to know if these people are XY. It's not a witch hunt. It is not out to be mean. It just purely is women's sport, needs to be for women. And these people there needs to be, like I said last week, there needs to be an open, the men's category just needs to be an open category. And then anyone really can compete in the men's category. It's up to them, because that doesn't disadvantage the men, because, like all the reasons I've just said, it doesn't disadvantage the men at all. So the other thing too is that, so what happens with men as well, they usually have 45% more lean body mass. They have 30 to 50% less body fat than women. So they're more kind of muscle than they are fat, which is a big difference in sporting, in athletics. So even if someone's on testosterone blockers, their muscle mass drops by about 3 to 5%, and the body fat increases a little bit, but after 3 years. But they're still very male. This isn't a situation if it was, say, someone who was trans or something like that. I know these athletes are not that, from what I can understand. Okay, so they also obviously have advantages in things like height, wingspan, like I said, bone strength. lung volume and heart capacity, they're quite different. They also can carry they carry more oxygen in each drop of blood. There's more oxygen in that, so they can get more oxygen around the body between their blood and their heart capacity and the lung capacity. They can stay much more oxygenated, and so have much better performance. So the performance advantages range from, say, around 10% in swimming or running, but that could be 12 seconds in like a 2-minute race or something. But it's in things like throwing 50 plus percent, weightlifting 30 plus percent, okay, grip strength 60%. So in 2017, Duke University, they did a study where they looked at uh, all of the Olympic world and women's track and field champions, and what they saw. I think it was this Oz particular champion. Okay, yeah, world and women's track field champion Tori Bowes. Not quite sure if that's how you say the name, but that's the name I have here. That particular woman has been beaten 15,000 times by men and boys. That was in 2017, they saw that. So 15,000 times by men and boys who'd beaten that woman who was the women's track and field champion. She was an Olympic champion. They also said there's another one, Alison Felix, and in the 400 meters, she had been beaten 15,000 times by men and boys. Okay. So it shows you there's a big difference between, and sometimes this is like they do schoolboys against elite athlete women, and the boys beat them in different sports. So it's just not the same thing. We cannot have biological women competing with biological men. Biology does actually matter. So, and the other arguments, they said, oh, they've got a birth certificate or a what's it called, the passport that says they're women. So what? That's that's very easily changed in a lot of countries these days. In Australia, I think we've recently brought in new laws that you can change. Was it your passport or was it your birth certificate? I think it might be the birth certificate. But anyway, those things get changed all the time. Look, the issue is, I think at this Olympics, the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, is that what they're called? They seem to have really brought this whole progressive, in inverted commas, gender ideology, and they're not concerned about women's safety at all. And they could easily just do tests on these two participants within 3 hours, have the results, and know about safety. Now, people have been arguing with me about what women look like, that some women are more butch, which I talked about before, or they've been saying, oh, well, these two people have been beat by other women. Look, I don't care. I don't care if they've been beaten by other women 100 times. I don't care if there's other women who might look more butch than them. If they're XY, they're not women, full stop. Right? That's just, and you could see that some of the athletes, some of the boxers, some of the female boxers who they have beaten throughout the week, you could see them at the end of the match doing this, right? Saying, I'm XX, they're XY, right? It is just not fair to have biological men competing with biological women. And I don't care what reasons you put behind it. It's not about a witch hunt for those people, and it's not about being cruel for those people. It is just saying that women's safety, women's sports, women's so many different aspects for women. It's like our safety. It's, women are allowed to have safe spaces, they're allowed to have private spaces, they're allowed to have their dignity. They're also allowed to have sports where they can compete, in fairly and safely compete. And all of those things are at risk. And I am so sick of people talking about inclusivity all the time when inclusivity does not include women, right? We have to be inclusive to everybody in regards to all of this gender stuff, but not women. It always excludes women. The inclusivity always means we include everybody except women. And any women that stand up against this, the attacks that they get are unbelievable, and the death threats and the threats, sexual type threats, and all sorts of things. It's just disgusting. So, and the other thing too is what I'm really, really sick of in general, in discourse, just in conversations, whether they be online or whatever, is that we make these assumptions straight away that the person on the other side is evil and terrible and bad, and we call them names. So, for example, what we do is if a woman is trying to champion other women, like I have been talking about here, then people like me get called a TERF, which is trans exclusionary radical feminist, or we get called, well, every name under the sun that you can think of. But also what we get called is transphobes, like, well, I'm afraid of trans people. I'm not afraid of trans people. Live your best life. I'm just aware that women need protection in their spaces and in their sports. So we get called all sorts of names. So in any kind of conversation, whether it be about something like this or whether it be, look, it could be any conversation at all, pretty much any conversation where kind of politics comes up, is people make this assumption that the people all on the other side are the other side and they're all evil and bad. And it's this whole thing, excuse me, I'll just have a sip of tea. And the thing about a lot of these things, like like this whole agenda for us to not consider sex and expect that there's a whole bunch of different genders and we need to just be accepting of everything and accepting, yes, as far as, like I've said before, do your thing, make go your hardest, live your best life, as long as it's legal, not harming anyone, go for it. There's a difference. So when you expect me and you expect pretty much all women and society to completely change every single thing just to include you or to make you feel better, that's a whole different story to just live and let people do their thing, right? So when we are expected to change our language, to change our level of safety, to have, since when in my lifetime I would have told you that I would have never seen boxing with a man beating a woman in boxing and people cheering it on and not only cheering it on, but when someone like me said, no, don't do this is disgusting, actually the people being vilified is people like me. And it's women women are some of the strongest in defending this because we must be inclusive and compassionate. Inclusive of who? And compassionate with who, right? And that's what it comes down to. Like everything has, every choice you make about who you're inclusive to or who you say yes to or what you say yes to, there's a cost. And sometimes the cost is worth it and sometimes it is not, right? When it comes to something like this, the cost is not worth it because you're simply saying 50% of the population, which is women, don't matter. It doesn't matter what we need, what we want, our safety. We've been fighting for all these years, right, to finally get women's rights. But it's just saying, well, too bad, because you've got to get out of the way because a man might be offended. No, just no, right? There is, I've heard this described this way on the Modern Wisdom podcast. Chris, he was talking about this. He's calling it, performative empathy. And, he says, and he calls it toxic compassion. And toxic compassion is the prioritization of a short-term emotional comfort over everything else. So it's basically saying, oh, I'll feel better because I'm really inclusive if I say yes to this person to go in this race and box against this woman, right? So it's that short-term comfort. Oh, I'm so empathetic. I'm so kind. I am so compassionate. It is not compassionate to girls who are all being injured and harmed in these things. Girls are either missing out on scholarships, they're missing out on sponsorships, they're missing out on getting places in teams, they're missing out on going to things like the Olympics, they're being put in danger in sports like the volleyball player I'd mentioned last week who was permanently damaged in a volleyball game, and they are sharing their change rooms in most cases with these men as well, so no privacy or dignity as well. And so these women are completely missing out, but we feel good because we're so compassionate and so empathetic. And it's just so interesting that I've always been about compassion and empathy, but now it's actually being wielded like a weapon, and it is toxic, and it's been used in a way that was never meant to be. In my belief, it was never meant to be. So, I'm compassionate as long as you're the right kind of person for me to be compassionate to. And it was that the other day, I think it was the tolerance thing. I can't remember if I mentioned this last week, but there was someone on Twitter saying, well, I'm a really tolerant person. I'm one of those really, really tolerant people, but I can't be tolerant of intolerant people. Okay. So you can't be tolerant of intolerance. So then you're not really tolerant because, well, who decides what's intolerant? Anything I don't agree with must be intolerant. Okay, that's intolerant. I don't agree with you. I can't be tolerant of you, but I'm a really tolerant person. Or it's like I'm really, really compassionate, really, really compassionate as long as you're the right person. You're a woman who doesn't want your safe spaces invaded and your sports taken over. I can't be compassionate against you. You're evil and bad. So there's all this performative compassion happening that doesn't really mean anything. There's nothing behind it. And it's a short term, oh, I feel good about myself. I can put like the right hashtag on my Twitter or on my Instagram. And I can just, have this send out this message to the world, virtue signal to the world, how wonderful and compassionate and kind I am. But there's no kindness or compassion behind it because nobody stops and thinks about the consequences. So you change these rules and you change all the sports. Eventually, women's sports, why would you bother? And then the other thing I hear people say is things like, it's hardly happening at all. And this is the standard response from the left at the moment, right? So the first response is, that's not happening. That doesn't happen. And when it's happening already, and it's already happening quite a lot, and it's actually been hundreds and hundreds of cases now. It's not kind of like two people. It's many, many, probably thousands. I don't know, but many hundreds that I've heard about so far of cases of men in women's sports and women missing out. But so the first thing is like, it's not happening. Second is, but if it was happening, it would be wonderful. And the third thing is it's happening, but look, it's not happening much, and there's just levels of denial that are used. So when someone like me says these things, that they're the levels of different things. It's not happening. That doesn't happen. Oh, well, it's not happening much, and then it's like, if it was happening, it'd actually be a really good thing. It's like, oh, okay. So it's sort of super weird how it's just the level of gaslighting, the level of don't believe your lying eyes, which is what my last week's episode was called, because it is don't believe your lying eyes. Essentially at this point in time, I have seen no evidence to say that these two boxers in the Olympics are not XY, which means they are male. Now, I understand they didn't grow up that way and they might not feel that way, but essentially they are until proven otherwise. And if that turns out to be true, that is a problem. They can, like I said, it's very easy to sort this out. They need to be tested so we know for sure. And that's the other thing that IOC have stopped doing, because everyone says IOC have checked them out. No, they just look at your birth certificate or your passport. That doesn't mean anything these days. But what they don't do is they don't do testing anymore. They seem to have a real problem with testing. So the IOC don't care because they're all about being inclusive and compassionate and kind, except to women. Remember, we can only have inclusion and compassionate and kindness for the right people. And if you don't fit into the rules of who the right people are, you don't get compassion and you don't get kindness. You get quite the opposite. So that's the sort of stuff that's really, really frustrating me at the moment. The other thing that's going on in the world at the moment is in the UK. There's different riots and things happening. And I see everyone saying, oh, it's the far right come out and doing terrible things. And look, that's a complicated conversation. So it's kind of not like a 2-minute end of a podcast type conversation. But all I will say is the majority of the people I'm seeing, look, there's always on either side, there's extreme people. Anyone who's out doing any kind of violence and being cruel and stuff like that, not good, right? However, what happens is, again, anyone who just stands up for something, they get called names. So, at the moment, if you stand up because you're concerned about certain things happening, when you're in your country where there's been, over there that there's just been terrible things that happen. There've been little girls blown up at Ariana Grande concerts, and there's little children stabbed last week, and there's this ring of girls being abused and giving them alcohol and drugs, and basically using them as prostitutes in this sort of like this horrible sex ring, and there's many thousands of girls that were involved in that, and the target for that was, young teenage white girls. And uh, and the problem is, if you bring up any of these issues, straight away these people are called racists. And again, you can't have conversations if you can't, you cannot, it cannot be that you can't bring anything up. Now, if you're out on the street, screaming at a particular race, or being cruel to a particular person, or doing any kind of violence, that's not on. But being able to just have a conversation and go, look, all these things have happened here in this country. I'm really concerned. What can we do to resolve this? That's not an issue, and it should be okay to have that conversation. The same thing happened during COVID. You were either just this crazy, anti-vaxxer person just because you had concerns, and so what we do is we try any conversation that we don't want to have, instead of being challenged, hearing a different point of view, and actually working. Like, we cannot work stuff out. Look, you work out solutions when you talk. This is what Jordan Peterson talks about all the time, that you can't work out a solution. You need to actually write it down and verbalize and talk about it to come up with solutions. So you have to be prepared to have the conversation, sometimes get it wrong, because you might be getting it wrong while you're kind of nutting it out. Have you ever had that situation where you're trying to figure something out? You get someone to talk to you about it, and you're trying to figure out a way around something, and you kind of have to do you say lots of wrong things, and then you're kind of, oh, okay, that's the answer. And you find the answer, right? But you find the answer because you got the permission to say all the wrong things until you find the right thing. Well, this is the same thing in all complex topics in our society. We need to be able to respectfully and calmly have conversations about problems and say, look, I'm worried about this, I'm concerned about that. Instead, what we do is we get in our camps and we say, well, those people are racist, or those people are snowflakes, or those people are this, or those people are that, or those people are transphobes, or whatever. We call people phobes and all that kind of stuff, so that we don't have to listen to them. That really frustrates me. And I think that we need to actually be able to have difficult conversations. And as long as we can do that respectfully, I think we can learn a lot from each other when we have conversations. And you actually have to be prepared to be right, to be wrong, so you can get it right. And that's called having conversations, not being afraid of being cancelled or having your life destroyed for having a conversation, and trying to come up with solutions, because we've got lots of complex things going on in this world at the moment. And we don't get solutions by jumping into our corners and jumping on each other and calling each other names every time someone says a trigger word for you. We have to be able to say, look, let's just have a conversation, and believe that we're both coming to the conversation with, well intentioned, right? And just have difficult conversations. We need to be able to do that in our society. So that's what's really on my mind at the moment. I hope that is a bit of a rant. Hope that makes sense to you as well. Look, please like, subscribe, and share. I'm on YouTube and Rumble for those of you listening. And I think I'm almost on all of the podcast platforms, or I will be fairly shortly. I hope you have a great week. And oh, by the way, Australia is doing really, really well in the Olympics. And the local girls from me, because I'm not that far from Penrith, I was actually born in Penrith, in Sydney, and Jess Fox and her sister, I don't know how to say her name, is it Noemi? I don't know, but the two Fox girls, they have done amazingly. They won their 3 gold medals in the sort of kayak, I don't know what they're called, but some sort of kayak races. And they're amazing. They're phenomenal. So good on them. And it looks like our tally for Australia is very good overall, considering we're such a small country from population compared to other countries. We're doing really well. So go Aussies. I'm really pleased about that. So some good things this week as well. It's not all bad, but this conversation is called, what's on my mind. And they're the things that are on my mind at the moment. There's a lot going on in the world. Please be prepared to have difficult conversations with people if you come at it from a place of integrity and honesty, and not to do a gotcha on each other. Then it's a good place to start. Anyway, I hope you have a good week, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks. Bye.